welcome to our third session in American English Live Series 23. We're so excited that you are here with us today. My name is Elena, and I'll be with you today with my colleague behind the scenes, Gavell, who will be the moderator, helping answer questions and responding to comments. We wanted to let you know that today's session will be recorded and shared across various platforms. By attending and adding your comments to the chat section during today's webinar, your first name, country, and/or comment may be included in the video recording. By participating, you consent to your appearance in the recording and its use for the purposes related to the work or business of FHI 360 and the U.S. Department of State. If you do not want to appear in the recording, please do not share any comments in the chat box during the live webinar. Throughout Series 23, we are exploring a variety of topics in classroom management. We hope you'll be able to use the practical ideas we share. So here's what to expect today. The session is about 60 minutes long. The presenter will present the material, and I, as your host, will ask questions and make comments too. But we really hope to hear from you, our audience, so that we can address your ideas and experiences. So please share your thoughts in the chat box throughout the session. And now for today's webinar, a backwards approach to teaching graph literacy. Reading graphs and tables is an important academic skill. These elements present valuable information on their own, supplement and summarize dense texts, and appear frequently on proficiency tests such as the IELTS. However, graph literacy is a common challenge for many learners who may feel intimidated and struggle to identify key information. This session introduces a backwards approach that begins not with reading graphs, but with learners conducting their own simple surveys and then creating graphs from their findings. This task-supported collaborative method helps demystify graph reading through a hands-on, integrated skills experience. By shifting the sequence of instruction, this approach promotes learner confidence and a fun, engaging classroom environment. Though often associated with higher-level academic work, this strategy can be successfully used for learners of all levels and a wide range of classroom contexts. And now, we are pleased to introduce our presenter, Mina Gavell. Mina is an English language instructor and teacher trainer with a bachelor's degree in English language and literature and a master's degree in TESOL. She has taught learners of all ages in public and private settings in the United States, South Korea, Uzbekistan, and Kenya. Her work has been published in peer-reviewed journals and travel magazines, and she has presented at conferences in the US and internationally. In Kenya, she served as an English language fellow at Maseo University, supporting teacher development through the English Language Professional Association of Kenya. Most recently, she lived in Tajikistan, working with American councils. She now resides in Alaska. Welcome, Mina.
Thanks, Elena. I'm very happy to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us today. As you heard, my name is Mina Gavell. I am an English language educator and also a teacher trainer. As an English language fellow and specialist, and through my work with American councils, I've worked with learners and teachers in Central Asia, as well as East and North Africa. This is my second American English Live webinar, and I'm really happy to be here. And as mentioned, today I'll be talking about a backwards approach to teaching graph literacy. So just to give you a little bit of background about myself and also today's topic, a long time ago in 2010, I started teaching academic English to international students in my hometown or home state of Connecticut. You can see it there. It's on the East Coast. We had students coming from all over the world to study academic English. They were looking to study at university in the US. 3 years later, I moved to Portland, Oregon, on the other side of the country. I continued to work at the same branch or a different branch of the same school, teaching the same kinds of learners. And then in 2018, I moved across the world as an English language fellow, and I moved to Uzbekistan. So it's quite far away. There I taught at Urgench State University near the ancient city of Khiva. So the reason why I'm telling you all of this is that these are diverse places with diverse students who were all very smart, motivated learners. But something I noticed they had in common was that many of them struggled to read and describe graphs. And so I continued working on this. I tried different strategies. Nothing was working. And so finally, I decided to try a different approach. And that's what I would like to share with you today. So this is our plan for today. We're going to start out by exploring some of the challenges of graph literacy, but also the importance of it. We will look then at the backwards approach to teaching graph literacy. This is a full lesson plan, and you can use all of it or just some of it as you like. After that, we'll look a little bit closer at the lesson. We'll identify the challenges as well as the benefits. And then finally, my favorite part, we'll discuss ways to adapt this lesson so it can be suitable for you and your students. So let's begin. But before we go any further, I just want to make sure that we are on the same page. I've been using this term graph literacy, which is also called graphic literacy by some people. Most of you may know the term literacy, which means the ability to read. And so graph literacy is the ability to read and understand graphs. Or, as we see here, the ability to read and interpret the information presented in graphs and charts. I also want to emphasize this last point by that graphs, I mean graphs and charts. I'm using this term interchangeably. And so also I'll mention that we'll mainly be looking at bar charts and pie graphs today. So now I have a question for the audience out there. I'm curious to know, what has been your experience with teaching students to read and interpret graphs and charts? I'm wondering if this is something you all do. Some of you might think this is for math and science teachers. I'm guessing we mostly have English teachers out there. So I'm just curious to know if this is something you do and has it been challenging? And I hope you'll share in the chat.
Thanks for that great question, Mina. So let us know, everybody, what has your experience been in the classroom with teaching students graph literacy? Have you taught them to read and interpret graphs and charts? Please share your experience with us. All right, so it looks like we have some comments coming in already. So Amina says it's been a mixed experience. Some of her students seem to catch on quickly with this concept, but others need more support. Let's see, Luca is saying, this is my first time learning about graph literacy, and I haven't experienced it yet with my students. Thanks for sharing. Raj said that they enjoy it more when it's about their own interests. Absolutely. Maya says that she has a mixed class, and so it can be challenging sometimes for the lower level students. And let's see, Jonas says it's tough at first to do this, but hands-on tasks seem to help. We have another participant saying that this isn't something that they teach at all in their classroom. All right, and let's see, one more comment here from Sophia. Sophia says, it is easier for my students with a strong background in math to do this. So often she'll pair them with students who find it more challenging. That's a great approach. Thank you all for sharing.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of interesting feedback. Thank you for sharing that. Sounds like there's a diversity of experience here. And I think that in our session today, we can touch on a lot of these points. All right. So I'd like to get a little deeper and address some of the more pertinent challenges here. I think this was kind of mentioned or touched on by one of the participants here, that we tend to see a difference in the background here. Many of us think of this skill of reading and understanding graphs as something related to the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. And we expect our students to learn those skills there. But math and science teachers don't always explicitly teach this skill. They may expect students to already have it. And when they do work directly with this skill, they often don't teach it as a reading skill. They go ahead and start to apply it. Something else to think about is that in some countries, students begin to specialize in their fields very early on. So if a student decides to pursue something like English, they may not get a lot of exposure to graphs and charts, reading them, but they will in fact need them. They are everywhere. A 2013 study done at a Pakistani university by Rind echoed this experience. Rind found that he had kind of a mixed of learners there. He had learners who were very strong in these skills and learners who were very weak. And he found that those students with a math or science background tended to be the ones who worked easily with graphs and charts. Personally, I see graph literacy as a reading skill that is necessary for all adults to function in the world. And I would love to see this included with regular reading curricula. Another challenge I want to talk about is based on a study done here in the US in 2015. In this study, standardized tests, those tests taken by school children, were analyzed to see how well they did with graphs and charts. And it was found that generally American students had the basic skills of graph reading, but that they tended to struggle with identifying trends and making predictions. So these higher level skills were a challenge. And then finally, in my experience, I found often that these graphs and charts seem very disconnected to reality or concrete information. This isn't always the case. If you're reading an article, a clear graph does a lot to help you understand it. But when the graph is decontextualized or by itself, it can be very difficult. I'm thinking back to my time in Uzbekistan at the university. My students had what I call IELTS mania. They were crazy about the IELTS. They all wanted to take it. Most of them were enrolled in special private classes. They were studying, taking practice tests, and they were all coming to me with the writing test. Task 1 of the writing test involves reading and interpreting a graph or a table, and they were really struggling. And I noticed that they were even struggling with the topic or the title. So while Googling some sample tests, I came across this recycling rate for selected materials 1982 to 2010. So just based on this title, it's kind of hard to imagine what this is talking about, especially if you're from a community that doesn't recycle. And then thinking about these dates, 1982 to 2010, may seem like history for many of our students. Some of them weren't even born yet during this time. So these are just some of the challenges that our students, and therefore we as teachers, are facing when we're dealing with graph literacy. So we'll keep this in mind as we move forward. So some of you out there might be wondering, okay, graph literacy is very difficult sometimes, and I don't want to take the IELTS. So is this really important? And I would argue that yes, this is very important. For one thing, graphs and charts are part of everyday life. We don't just find them in scientific articles, they're everywhere, newspapers, magazines, advertisements, your bank statement. They can help you with scientific articles, but you can also use them to understand trends in pop culture, popular music, and movies. And they can also help us to make important decisions about our life regarding our health or financial investments. So being able to read graphs is part of being a responsible and informed reader. And most societies take pride in being literate, so graph literacy, I think, should be part of this. So also, I want it to be clear that reading graphs isn't an extra layer of literacy. In fact, graphs are supposed to be a helpful strategy for reading. Many of you out there probably teach reading skills, and in doing this, you teach pre-reading, skimming and scanning skills. And we teach our students to skim titles, skim images, things like that. And often charts and graphs are some of the images that are available to us. So if someone has strong graph literacy, they can quickly look over a graph. It actually sums up a large body of text. And so by looking at this text, they'll have a better understanding what the text is talking about. As mentioned already, graphs are a big component of the STEM fields, and students in these fields tend to have a stronger grasp of graph literacy. However, those of you who are teaching young learners want to make sure that those students are prepared as they move into their fields of study. And then finally, as you've heard, if you want to take the IELTS, you are going to need graph literacy. Even if you're not interested in the IELTS, though, it is a component of many standardized tests. Often they include graphs and tables with the expectation that test takers demonstrate their ability to read and identify relevant features. So basically, what I'm saying, it's hard to get very far in school or very far in life without having graph literacy. One more note I'd like to make before we get into the lesson plan itself. This American Live series is devoted to the topic of classroom management. So as we go along, I'd like you to keep this question in the back of your mind. How does our topic today, graph literacy, connect to classroom management? And something that may help here is to remember some of the reasons why students go off task and misbehave. These are 4 common reasons. So first off, students will go off task when they don't understand what they're supposed to do. Sometimes they'll do this to try to look busy so the teacher doesn't notice, or they may use this as an excuse to do something else. Another big reason is when students don't have anything to do. Maybe they're waiting for their turn or they have already completed their work. Sometimes when things are too hard, we have the students who will ask the teacher for help, but others will not. They'll just give up on what they're working on and go off task doing something they shouldn't. And then finally, we have the students who know what to do, they can do it, they have something to do, but they're not interested in it. And so students will use this as an excuse to take out their phones or start speaking in L1 to a friend. So as we go through this lesson on graph literacy, I'd like you to keep an eye out and see if any of these issues are addressed in this lesson, and then we'll come back to this question towards the end of our session. Okay, so we've set the stage, we've discussed the challenges and the importance of graph literacy, and now we are ready to look at the backwards lesson. The lesson plan. I had wanted to include a picture of me teaching this lesson in Uzbekistan, but I could not find one. This is the closest I could get. I am in Uzbekistan, in Urgench, in this photo, but it is actually several years later, and I'm in a secondary school, not the university. But it looked similar to this. Okay, so originally, this is the lesson objective I had. Students will be able to read, interpret, and describe pertinent information on a graph. This is the objective I had in the US with my academic students. This is what I had at Urgench State University with my pre-service English teachers. I had great materials. I had textbooks. I had the entire internet, including some excellent BBC materials. I had practice tests from IELTS, and I also ran a IELTS prep club, but it didn't seem to matter. My students weren't making much improvement. They were frustrated. I was frustrated. I was very tempted to give up, but I really felt this was a skill they needed, and many of them were motivated by the IELTS to keep going. So essentially, I took this objective and I turned it upside down. Or we could also say I took a backwards approach. Instead of starting with reading a graph, why not start by creating our graphs first? So my objective became students will be able to conduct surveys, organize data, and create accurate graphs. I thought that maybe seeing how a graph is developed would give students a better understanding of how to read it. And either way, I figured it was worth a try. I'm going to pause again here before we go any further because I want to talk about the structure of this lesson, which uses a task-based approach. And if we're going to talk about a task-based approach, I think we should define the term task. So a task is an exercise that requires students to actually communicate. So unlike a fill-in-the-blank worksheet or something like that, with a task, students will need to actually exchange information. So true communication. Something else about this is that the language or the task itself are often related to the real world. This also differs from something like a worksheet or textbook exercise, or even an imaginary context. Of course, I do want my students to use accurate grammar, good vocabulary, clear pronunciation. But for the task itself, we're going to focus on language fluency, and we can always come back later at the end of the lesson and clean up any mistakes and focus on accuracy. Finally, the most important aspect of a task is that it has a clearly defined product. So a product could be something physical like a poster or a poem or an essay, or it can be something spoken like a conversation, speech, or a performance. Either way, there is a clear result that the teacher and the students can use to assess whether or not the objectives have been achieved. So this is a common strategy. So I'm wondering, the audience, if any of you have worked with a task-based approach, and if you have, is there a task that you've recently designed or used with your learners? And if so, what skills did it aim to develop? Please share.
All right, everyone, let us know. Have you used this task-based approach before in your classroom? And if you have, can you share a task that you've recently designed or used with your learners? What skills were you hoping to help them develop through that task? We would love to hear from you and hear some wonderful creative ideas that you all are doing in your own classrooms. All right. So it looks like we have a comment coming in from Mohammed who says, we graphed our favorite fruits and it was great for comparison. That's a wonderful idea. Tanya is saying that they had students analyze a table with travel information and they were looking at working with reading for specific information. Those were the skills they aimed to develop. Perfect. Let's see. Julia says we talked about screen time and students kept a log of their screen time for a week. And then they compared the data that was collected. Mina has students give students a photo prompt and asked them to write a short story to help them work with descriptive writing and vocabulary. That's fantastic. I'm sure students had a great time with that. Yusuf is saying we did a role play activity. So students were the news reporters and they had to present information using graphs and charts that they created. Diego says that he showed students two graphs from social media. One of them was correct and one wasn't, and they had to find the mistakes and explain why. And Sarah says that they designed posters in their class to promote an upcoming festival in their village. Very fun. And finally, Leo is saying that students created short video diaries in English, and that the goal was to help them with self-expression, but also to practice past tense verbs. Those are some great ideas, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, yes, indeed. Thank you for sharing. I love what you all said because I think it shows the range of what a task can be. It sounds like some of you are working on reading skills, writing skills, speaking skills, integrated skills, and it sounds like some of you are using graphs and charts as well. Great. All right, we're going to look now at the structure of the lesson. We'll start off with the typical structure of a task-based lesson, which starts out with an introduction. This introduction can be a warm-up, or it could be a chance to review any concepts or skills needed for the lesson. This is then followed by a pre-task activity. This might be a grammar exercise or vocabulary focus, or anything else that helps prepare students for the main activity, helping to scaffold them. Now we're ready for the main task. Here, the students will use authentic language to communicate on a task that is somehow related to real life, and the result will be a product that can then be assessed. And then finally, we have the post-task activity. And here students have a chance to further apply the skills of the lesson, but often in a more specific or personalized way. So that's the general structure of a task-based lesson. And now for this lesson specifically, in the introduction, I'm going to start out with a warm-up with some survey-style questions. And I'm going to use the answers from those questions to do a kind of mini lesson about what questions are suitable, what they might look like on a graph, and kind of review the basics of graphs. After that, our pre-task activity will be to create and conduct surveys in small groups. The task itself will be for students to organize their survey answers. This is the data, and then they'll use this to create their graphs. And then after, we'll have our post activity, and here students will identify and describe key information in their graphs. And you might notice this is very similar to my original objective in teaching graphs. We're just kind of going about it a bit differently. So delving a little bit deeper, starting with the warm-up and presentation. As I noted, we'll do this by asking students some survey-style questions that we might find in a survey. And then I'll use the students' answers to demonstrate important points about making graphs. And I think instead of explaining it, let's just try this. So I will be the teacher and audience. You are the students. Hello, class. Today we're going to create our own graphs based on our own surveys. To warm up, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Our first question is, what is your favorite season? So if you'd like, you can share your answers in the chat. Unfortunately, oh, sorry.
Nope, I was just going to say, let us know, everyone. Yeah, what is your favorite season? Go ahead and share those responses with us.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to take your responses and make a chart, so I had to pretend and predict what your answers might be. Maybe they look something like this. I can't be sure. But we'll imagine that these are your answers. And so I drew this on the board based on those answers. Or if I use technology, then Google Forms or Excel could make this for me. If I drew it, it wouldn't look as nice as this, but you get the idea. Okay, class. So we see in my first category here is spring, and 43 of you like spring. So I drew this light blue bar, and it goes up to the number 43. And I will label it spring. Next, we have summer, and 25 of you chose summer. 35 of you love fall. And finally, 22 of you, which is still a pretty high number, 22 of you said that winter is your favorite season. On the left, we can see these numbers that show how many people responded this way. And then on the bottom, we can see that each category is labeled. And at the top, we have a title. If we were actually in a class together, I would do this instead as a four corners activity instead of just asking. I can bring a little bit of kinesthetics into the classroom. So what I would do is I would label the four corners of the classroom with each season, as you see here. And then I would ask the students, what is your favorite season? And the students would get up and they would go move to the corner that is their favorite season. And then based on this, I would make my little chart on the board. Another adaptation I could use is I could use Google Forms, Mentimeter, or something like that, and send a survey to the students' personal devices, and it would automatically make a chart for me. So that's a digital option. I could take this information, you saw a bar chart, but I could also make this into a pie graph and show students the same information demonstrated a different way. And then as a class, we would compare the two to see which we preferred, which is more useful. I want to note that we usually use percentages rather than actual numbers with a pie chart. And so a little bit of extra math is needed in this case. So this brings us, class, to our next question. I would like to know, what is your favorite animal? Please share your responses in the chat.
Well, that's a great question, Mina. I'm looking forward to everyone's responses. So let us know, what is your favorite animal? I'm guessing we're going to see a lot of different responses come in, but let's take a look. All right, Daniela says dogs. Jin, says owls are their favorite. Interesting. Let's see. Noah says cats. Layla says elephants. Elephants are your favorite. Tom says fox. Very interesting. Priya says, I love dolphins. Jonah is saying that they like pandas. Miriam says that horses are her favorite animal. Sam says a turtle. Ahmed says cats. Oh, and we have another comment from Layla who says dogs. So cats and dogs seem to be at the top, but a lot of different animals coming in from our audience.
Excellent. My favorite animal is also the elephant, so I was glad that it got a shout out. Okay. So we have a lot of interesting animals. We'll imagine that I've recorded all of your votes, and now I will make my graph. Okay, here we are. And Alina, we're going to imagine that you are one of my most active students. So when I ask the class, you're quick to respond. So here we are. What do you think about this graph?
Well, I think it's a little hard to read. There are many different colors. Some of them are similar, and some of the numbers are really scrunched together too.
I agree. This is very hard to read. This is not a useful visual aid. Absolutely. Do you think that maybe the problem is the question? Do you think I need a different question?
I don't think the question is the problem. It seems like a clear question and a good question.
I agree. I think it's just that there are many different types of answers. So I have an idea. So what do you think about this, Elena? Is this easier to read?
Yes, it's much easier to read. I can clearly see all of the categories and the percentages as well.
Excellent. Yeah. So as you can see, we will imagine, I couldn't make it in real time, but we'll imagine, because generally people like dogs. So we see a lot of people like dogs, cats, and then birds. And then we had a smattering or a variety of other answers like owl, elephant, fox, dolphin, panda, turtle, I think. And so those all get grouped into other. And with this, I can also make a nice bar graph that is clear and easy to read. Okay, class, I hope you are ready for your last question, and that is, what country do you live in? Feel free to share.
All right, everybody, chime in and let us know in the chat What country do you live in?
And we'll imagine I take your data and I go ahead and I make a graph. There we go. Oh, I forgot the labels. Hang on. There we go. That's with labels, but I don't think that's better. Okay, let me do it as a bar graph, see if that's better. Oh, no, now I don't even have all of the countries. Okay. What if I reorganize this into continents? Okay. Elena, what do you think?
Yeah, this version looks very clear. It's much easier to read and less busy.
I agree. We could also put this into a pie chart as well. It's just a matter of how we organize our information. Before we go any further, though, I just want to note, you may have noticed that I've been using just pie graphs and bar charts. I chose these two because they're the simplest to use and the simplest to work with. But I noticed that when I was teaching this, I had many students who wanted to use line graphs. And line graphs are great, but I told my students to hold off because they tend to show a change over time. And so to get that kind of information, we can't use a simple survey. So for today, we'll just be focused on pie charts and bar graphs. All right, so I'm guessing that many teachers out there use surveys. They have, or they hopefully would like to. They're a great warm up, and they help us to find out more about our students. So I'm curious to know, everyone out there, what kind of survey questions have you or would you ask your students?
Let us know, what survey questions would you ask your students, or have you asked your students before? I think we heard a comment earlier about favorite fruit, so that was one.
Sure.
But let us know, everybody, what other survey questions have you asked or would you ask? There's a lot of good options you can pick from. Let's see. All right, Mohammed says that they would ask questions about their favorite subject in school. That's a great idea. Julia says that they have asked how students get to school, so maybe the method of transportation. Diego says that my students are young learners, so I would ask them about their favorite snack. That's a great idea. Sarah is saying maybe about their weekend hobbies. Yusuf says that my students love learning with songs. So maybe they would ask, what's your favorite type of music, as the survey question. Let's see, Mina says, I think asking about which social media they use would be an interesting option. All right, and we'll pull one more comment. All right, so Leo says that they ask what time students wake up or go to sleep. Great ideas, everyone. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Those are a lot of interesting questions, and I appreciate how relevant these questions are to the actual students. They're things they would be interested in answering and talking about. Okay, so we're ready to talk about the pre-task activity. So for this activity, I will divide the class into small groups of 3 or 4, and then each group will get to choose a topic of their own. Based on their topic, they will then create 1 to 3 survey questions, and then they will choose their best question. So in the end, they only use 1 question, but I have them create 3 because I want to push their thinking, and oftentimes our first question isn't our best one or a best idea. And then I will check their questions, and once they have their survey question, they will go ahead and conduct the survey. So we have something that we have to consider here. We can't have members of the same group all asking the same question. This will create false data. So we imagine that this group of young ladies here come up with the question, what is your favorite animal? And then they go out and they ask their classmates. And let's imagine that in this class, there is one student who likes owls, just as one of our participants likes owls. So they go out and they ask, and I think the person in blue goes out and asks, "What is your favorite animal?" And the student responds, okay, the student in orange says, "What is your favorite animal?" And the response is, "I like owl." And another member of the group goes out and asks, "What is your favorite animal?" And the same student tells the one in blue, "I like owl." And then the other students ask, "What is your favorite animal?" And find out that there's this student who likes owls. So after asking, all four members of the group have asked, "What is your favorite animal?" They come back together and they share their information and they find, four students in the class like owls. But this isn't true. Actually, there's only one student in the class that likes owls. So this is a little bit of a problem. So one way to prevent this problem is to do individual surveys instead of group surveys. But I mentioned that my students were struggling with graph literacy, so I want them to have the support of working as a team or working as a group. I want them to use collaborative learning to help them be successful. So instead, I'm going to use a jigsaw strategy. Some of you may know this strategy from reading activities. I'm going to use it here. So what I will do is I will number off each member of the group, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'll have all the ones work together, all the twos work together, all the threes work together, and all the fours work together. So it will look something like this. And if you don't have the exact number of students, that's okay too. If you look at this first group, you see there are 2 dark blue students. And so they will ask their question together. So in these mixed groups, students will conduct their surveys and answer them. And then when they are done, they will go back to their original groups. They will not ask other groups. If this seems too complicated, but you still want to make use of collaborative learning, another option would just to be doing this in pairs. And then the students stay in their pair as they conduct the survey. So we see these dark blue students here working in a pair. And then they are going to survey this group of orange students. So they may ask, "What is your favorite animal?" And then the orange pair will each answer what their favorite animals are. So one student loves cats, the other likes owls. And so the pair of blue students will have accurate data. One student likes cats, one student likes owls, and they will continue to survey other students. And this will result in accurate data. All right, now our students are ready for the main task, which is creating the graphs. If they're working in groups, they'll need to return to their original groups and they'll need to share their information and total it. And then based on this data or information, they will choose which graph, a bar graph or a pie graph, which one is most suitable. Students usually end up choosing the bar graph because they don't want to do the math for percentages, and that's absolutely fine for our purposes. So then students will create the graph by hand, or if it's an option, you can do this by computer using Excel or Google Forms, something like that. If you are doing it by hand, you will need paper and you will need either markers or crayons, colored pencils, or colored paper in order to make the graph. And then finally, they will need to add any labels and a key if needed. The last stage of the lesson is the post-task activity. In this part of the lesson, students have a chance to extend their learning and their critical thinking skills. For this lesson, students have created their graphs, so I'd like to revisit my original objective of having students read and interpret the graphs. So we could do this by having them do short oral presentations. They could do written summaries as they do in the IELTS. Another idea is for the students to make their own quizzes or worksheets and pass them out to the class and correct them. For my class, I had students do oral presentations on their own graphs, and then I collected the graphs And in the next class, I gave them out to other students. I had the students write a summary of their classmates' graphs, and then the students corrected that work. So now you know the lesson, and it's time to analyze this and see what's useful for this and what might be challenging. While we're going through this lesson, I'm guessing that many of you are thinking that, oh, yeah, this sounds good, but in my class, we can't do that because of, and there are some reasons or some issues. So those of you watching, please share what challenges you anticipate in conducting this lesson in your class. I have some ideas of my own, but I'm curious to see what you think.
All right. Thank you for all of that helpful information, Mina. And audience, let us know, what challenges do you think you might face if you were to try out this lesson with your students? And Mina, while we wait, we do have some lovely comments that have come in from the audience that I just want to share with you. So first, Liliana was saying that they really love the jigsaw idea or doing the interviews in pairs. And I think that'll work really well for their students because this is something they haven't ever done before. So that support will be helpful. And Yusuf also expressed their thanks for these ideas and said that they love the four corner activity. And Yusuf is going to try this in their class soon. So that's wonderful to hear. All right, and we do have some comments coming into this current question now about the challenges that people might face when using this lesson in their classroom. So Fatima says one of the biggest challenges for her will be time limits. Absolutely. Lena says, similarly, surveys can take longer than expected sometimes, especially if students are collecting data from classmates. So they might be anticipating time being an issue. Miriam says, I teach in a low resource setting without tech tools. And so she prints everything. Carefully planning for each group and always being prepared with backups in case things don't go as expected is something that she does and will need to do for this idea as well. Omar says, I think keeping students focused on the task is his biggest concern. Lucas says getting everyone to participate can be a challenge. And Isabel says sometimes they need help, students will need help interpreting the survey results. Absolutely, so that might be an extra level of support needed for this lesson. Thanks for sharing those challenges, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I heard some things that I hadn't anticipated, but there were also some things that I had thought of as well. So these are a few of the challenges I imagined. So hopefully at the end, we'll have a chance to address these and some others that you mentioned. All right, so hopefully you've also identified some benefits of this class or some things that you would find useful. I will point out a few myself. So first off, this is a very interactive lesson. It's interactive possibly at all stages, depending on what you do in the post-task activity. Students must speak and communicate in order to accomplish the task. They make their surveys together, they conduct their surveys, they share the answers from their surveys. And there's also some physical movement in here as well, which I think is always useful. Because the students are talking to their classmates and they've chosen the topics, we have very concrete information here, unlike some of what we see in illustrating in graphs. Here we are not talking about the rates of recycling in the 1980s. We're finding about our actual classmates' favorite animals or fruits or how they get to school, whatever. There is a lot happening in this lesson. It is a bit complicated, but there is always structure. Every stage of the lesson must be completed before the next one is begun. Every student has a role. Of course, as teachers, we can also increase or decrease how much structure is in this class, depending on the needs and abilities of students. And this brings me to the final point, is that this is a very adaptable lesson. We can make it longer, shorter, we can chop it up into pieces. We can focus on a specific topic or keep it general, and we can definitely make it easier or harder, depending on what suits our classroom context. I also want to highlight that although this lesson is focused on graphs and graph literacy, you may have noticed that conducting a survey is a large part of this, and this is a popular activity for many reasons. An article in English Language Forum highlights some of these benefits. So we can see here from this quote that in addition to giving students an opportunity to practice their speaking skills, there are many other critical thinking and higher order thinking skills involved here. Also, hopefully you remember early on that I mentioned that this session is devoted to graph literacy, but still connects to the American English Live theme of classroom management. I mentioned the factors here as some reasons why students go off task, and hopefully as we've been going, you've made some connections about how students' interests, their roles in these activities will help to minimize some of these issues. And now this brings us to the last part of our session today, and this is probably the most important part as well. What I talked about today hopefully was interesting to you, but if you can't think of anything here that you can use or adapt for your classroom, then it's just not that useful. So we'll see if we can come up with some adaptations. You guys had some great challenges that you mentioned. Some of them were ones that I anticipated. So I want to come back to these ideas here. Class time is definitely an issue. This is potentially a really long lesson. When I did it, I did the whole thing in 75 minutes and then revisited it for the last part. You might need more time with your students, or probably a lot of you don't have 75-minute classes. It's not a problem. You can split this lesson up into several classes. You could spread it over weeks if you wanted to. Another way to save time would be to assign the surveys outside of class. Level of the students is also very tricky. I mentioned that I conducted this with pre-service English teachers. So you might be thinking, oh, this is for high-level students. But actually, my students were a mixed group. They varied from A1 to B1. And so working in groups was one of the strategies I used to support less proficient students. And also keep in mind, you can make the questions as basic and easy as you want, or as difficult and complicated. For a low-level class or beginners, you could also do this as a whole class activity where you do everything together. You come up with the survey together, the teacher oversees the survey. As a class, you look at the data or the information and you create the graph together. And then, of course, you can make this harder by asking for specific types of questions, specific types of grammar, or you could start working towards those harder graphs like line graphs. And then finally, not everyone is teaching a general English class, so you could definitely adapt this class to a specific focus, like if you're teaching a content-based class. You can incorporate technology into every step here in the surveys and the graphs, all of that. But as noted, this can also be done low tech. Every time I've done this class, I've done this without printing any materials or using any kind of projector. So very low resource, low tech context. While I'm sharing this plan today, you're welcome to follow this step by step, but I would really like you to see this as a strategy that you can pull from and adapt anywhere. So finally, as we've been going through this session, I hope that you've come up with some ideas for your own classroom. I'd like to know, what changes or adaptations would you make so that you can use this lesson and it meets the needs of your classroom? I'd love to hear your ideas.
Mina, this is such a fantastic lesson plan that's so adaptable, as you said. So let us know, everyone, how could you use the ideas shared today in your classroom? Would you change or adapt any of the approaches that we learned about to suit your students? Let us know. All right, so it looks like Daniela has responded already and says, yes, I'd love to use all of the ideas today. That's fantastic. Jin says, definitely, they're very practical ideas and I'm going to use graphs in my classroom soon. Perfect. Noah says, I love the idea of splitting the lessons since teaching graphs will be hard to do in just one lesson. Absolutely. Layla says that her students would enjoy this lesson and using graphs, and she's going to add more scaffolding to help her students learn these skills. Tom says that I'm going to use this lesson plan next term. That's fantastic. Tom shared that lots of the ideas will be really fantastic to try, and they're especially going to use that four corners idea. Priya says this will work really well with their math unit that they have coming up. And so they're going to try and incorporate some peer collaboration and feedback into the lesson as well. And one more comment from Jonah. Jonah says, I'm already planning to use these ideas, and maybe I will use familiar topics with the students as the focus for the surveys and the graphs. Thank you so much, everybody.
Ah, those are awesome ideas. I love it. Excellent. Thanks everyone for sharing. Before I go, I just want to share these sources that I used in putting together today's session. And I want to thank our excellent audience for being so active, sharing fabulous ideas that have given me something to think about. And thank you, Elena, for being such a great student and partner. And thanks to the whole American English Live team for your hard work.
Thank you so much, Mina, for introducing this backwards approach and sharing this hands-on and highly flexible method for helping students build their graph literacy skills.